Welcome back. Let's continue where we left off with a short, quick video which walked through all the features at a very high level. We will take a deeper dive in this session and go through more of the features the app has to offer. We would also do another transaction in addition to the one we already have um, as a continuation. In this transaction, Brian is preparing to sell his house. We do another one where we actually have his house contracted to sell and the process that we go through. But let's click on this again and look at, so we already have one contact the client. We should actually add as many contacts as needed, um, but we'll come back to that even later. But let's get into the tasks. We have a number of tasks here. And the one thing you could do when there is a lot of tasks or line items is you can use the filter bar here. And these are all the tasks for Brian to see. And these are yours, and this is for all the tasks. And these are tasks for other people, which we don't have in this transaction. Um, so anyway, so you basically can filter. You can also filter by task name. Let's see if there's a task. Regarding inspection, there's a couple of them over here. So you can search by task name as well. Um, and that's how you export the task. So anyway, and also I quickly wanted to point out almost every page has this I button, the information or help page. So you can click on that and that'll give you all the help you need about this page. There's um, there's some help and tips um, elsewhere as well, and I'll show you that. If you scroll down, you can see there's a few help fields over here. This is something that's important and obvious. Those help are right below on the page. Uh, but if you want a detailed help, you can always click on the side button. And that goes for almost every page. You can go and click help almost everywhere. And it'll tell you what is what about that page and why it matters and so on. So anyway, so we have that. So the help page will tell you that, if you want to complete a task, you can click on the checkbox. So let's say preparing comps to estimate sale price. Let's say you already completed that task. You can go ahead and check mark. You can also, in this scenario, maybe you want to make a note of all the work you did. So you can click on this comment icon, so go ahead and click on that. And that basically would create a comment kind of pre-populated with a header and so on. The category here is informational. And then here you can go ahead and kind of make a note of, what you think the estimated price would be and why, what are all the comps, as the case may be. And then you could notate it. So that way, you can make your own notes categorized by what this note is for based on the task. So you could do it that way. But let's say you've done that. You have your amount and the reasoning why, um, and you want to finish it off. You can click this to mark this task as completed. Also, if you hover over here, or over each of the tasks for that matter, it'll kind of give you the details of the task itself. Another way to look at that is to click on this view icon, which will also give you the description of the task. Um, so, if you want to know what this task is all about and the headline is not sufficient, you can always do it that way. Here's another way to complete it. If you're on this screen, again, all those icons on the previous page in the summary page are also available here. So if you want to add a note to the task, mark it as complete, you can do all of that. So let's just mark this one as complete. It'll get into the completed folder or completed bucket. There's already a few things I completed earlier on. And so they all show up here. So there's that. Um, then you can also create a new task if there's a task. These are all the tasks that gets pre-populated for you. But let's say you decide, I want a brand new task, which is not in the here in the system. You can come here, enter that task, and then specify who the task is for, what the description is, what's the due date. All of these are pretty easy to fill in. And whether it's an informational tasks are just tasks. They're really uh, information. It's not really a task, I guess. But then anything else will follow one of these categories. Probably start with the not started. So you could create your own task. Let's say there's a task that you want to schedule on your calendar. This may be a task. Let's say this could even be, let me look at the upcoming task. Install Lockbox at home. Let's say you decided to do this on a certain date. It could be the due date, it could be before that. And let's say that's what you plan. You can actually import the task into your calendar. So that is another option that you have. Where you can import a task in a calendar. Now, quickly jumping back into these buckets, why do we have all these buckets? The current tasks are the ones you can start working on right now. None of these tasks are waiting on anything. For example, the client can update the contact list. If Brian has another seller, his wife probably, with whom he owns the house, he should go in and update the contact list. So he includes the other person. If Brian has an inspector he likes, he should probably update that as well. And so all the contacts can be updated. And so he should go ahead and do that. So all these tasks are things that are not waiting on anybody or anything and can be completed. The upcoming tasks, on the other hand, are things that are either not important right now, like install Lockbox. You're not going to do that on day one. And there's a proposed date that the template has provided based on the starting date you provided. And so you could then take it from there and kind of schedule it around that date. Same thing with a number of other things. Some of these are not required to be done, probably not on day one at least. Some tasks are waiting on other tasks, like completing seller's disclosure is probably waiting on you as the agent to provide the form to the client and probably explain to your client what this means as well. So anyway, some of these will show up once the main task is completed. So that is that. And then archive tasks are tasks that you can archive any task by clicking on this delete icon. That basically takes. Let's say your seller said, "I don't want to post on social media," and there's a task for that. He's like, "This is not something I want to do," and say you're like, "Okay," so you're not going to complete the task because you're not actually doing it. You're just going to delete the task because it's not relevant. And so you click on the delete icon, and off it goes into the archived folder. And so this is kind of how you manage and run your tasks on a day-to-day basis. The tasks are sorted by due date, and the tasks actually, you can see it here, but the tasks actually change colors. So if you're overdue, that will show up as overdue. And that's pretty much all about tasks at this point. Okay, moving on to the Q&A/notes section. So this is, we talked about briefly in the previous video, this is where the template automatically created a set of questions for the client to answer. So if you're a seller trying to sell a house, so some of these questions are, what are the utility providers, how do you want to show the house, the details of showing the house and so on, which basically, the seller can go out and start answering these questions. So you could be prepared when you're getting ready to list the house. So these would show up as for the seller as questions he or she needs to answer. And of course, hovering on each of these actually gives you the details of what that question is all about. So in this scenario, Brian would go in and he would look at these questions and be able to answer them. Now I've switched over to Brian and logged in as the client. And so as you can see, he sees pretty much the same screen, but he has some restrictions, like he can edit um, the transaction name itself. So he can click on it. Again, he can see the same details that were entered by you. Um, and so, but he doesn't have the ability to edit them, but he can let you know if something is incorrect. And then contacts, of course, he can go in and add new contacts if he wanted to. So he should definitely can and should probably do that. If you go on to the tasks, you can see it only lists the task for him. Here it is a simpler screen because the tasks are not categorized by principal versus agent versus client. These are all just his tasks, and because that's all we want our client to worry about. And also here it's pretty straightforward. He can complete the task. Basically, when the client completes a task, um, it actually doesn't get completed per se. It basically falls into the agent's bucket for review. So when, let's say, um, upload recent mortgage statements, that's a task, and Brian is happy to complete that. And so let's say he has gone to the file section, and we'll go there in a second to show how that's done. But he has gone over there, and he is taking care of that. So he would go and click this thumbs up icon, and so that disappears, and it goes into completed. So according to Brian, this is completed. So that's all he needs to worry about, right? He needs to see them as completed because that's kind of what he did. He completed the task. Um, and so this is, so it's under completed bucket. The status is review. But we'll check that in a second as to how that'll show up on the agent side. Um, and then again, similarly, he has some upcoming tasks that he can do later, like prepare a script for the house. That's something he doesn't have to do on day one. He could probably do that closer to the listing itself. So anyway, um, so those are the tasks that Brian could do. And then while we are here, um, I can quickly show you his Q&A and notes. Yes, so these are, now when these show up in Brian, it basically says, you have 11 topics that need answers. Hit the reply button below to answer them. So basically, since I am logged in as Brian, I would go in and say, yes, let me click reply on this one, and then say, electric, electricity is Austin Energy, and then provide the phone number as whatever the phone number may be, and so on. So you can go in and complete the task. And it's this rich text format. So if you really wanted to get fancy, you can bullet it all you want, and finally hit save. And so Brian can go in and start completing all of these tests. As he completes them, as you can see, the icon changes from red to blue. Um, and so as he completes them, they will all, go away from his queue, and it'll no longer show up as things that he needs to complete. I think there were 11 initially, if I remember. Now there's only 10. I'm just gonna do one more just to prove the point here, and then go back to Q&A, and then there's 9. So he just needs to work his way through doing all these tasks. Now, if Brian has a question for the agent, he can certainly do that. He can say, I have a question, then I can't think of a question right now. Some question, something like that. And so this one shows up at orange is informational for him, but is actually a question back to the agent. So if we switch to the agent tab, so we are at the agent's login. Agent login now, you see, client has 9 topics that need answers and reminder, and you have 1 topic. So this is the one, the some question that Brian created. So you can go and provide some answer, In the real world, you'll provide a real answer. Uh, this is a tutorial. And that goes away. And so you don't have any more questions. And then there's, of course, you can send a reminder just by clicking here, click on that, and basically sends a reminder to Brian saying, hey, you have questions to be answered. Hit send. Of course, these are pretty obvious. You want to be copied on this. You want to save a copy. Yes, both of these should generally be checked. There are instances where you don't want to save a copy. I'm going to hit send here. Let's say you are communicating with your broker, and that's a communication you necessarily don't want to share, or it's not something you don't most of the time you don't want to confuse your client with communication that is irrelevant, and that's something that you still need to talk to your broker about. So in that scenario, you can check that box so it doesn't show up um, and doesn't get tracked. So, but if you go back here, you can see that that last reminder you send is also tracked in the email list. So anyway, so this is one way to collaborate Q&A, as well as if you sometimes all you want to do is just store some info. So some info about the house. So I'm just going to paste it here. So if you just want to save some information for future use, you can do that. Now, again, you can keep this information private, which is only you can see it, or you can decide, no, I want this is public. Public as in my client can also see it. Sometimes it's good to keep information private. Again, this is information that is not relevant per se. It'll only confuse your client, or this is some exchange you have with your broker that is again not relevant to your client. You can keep it private, or you can say no, and then it'll be public. And then you hit save. That information exits there. I this comes in handy because there's lots of bits and pieces of information that show up while we are handling a transaction, and so sometimes you really don't know where to put them, and then you put them in some notepad or somewhere, and then of course you can find it when you need to find it. So this is one. Again, the theme here is to keep everything in one place. And so with that, you keep all the information relevant to the transaction right here in one place. So that's as far as Q&A goes. Again, one other thing I wanted to mention is this information is also context sensitive. When your client clicks on this icon, they see what's relevant to them because they have a different screen. They have different options, limited options, if you will, and so they would not see all of the agent options to confuse them. The client would see information that's more relevant to the page that they're seeing. Okay, at this point, I'm going to try to finish up this transaction. I'm basically going to simply mark all of these as completed, just so we can get past this. Um, and so let me take care of that. And having done that, you see this transaction is almost over. I just left one task incomplete, and that is the task to actually archive this transaction itself. Upcoming task. Anyways, I left that one open, so it's pretty much completed. And let's say we're ready to. We've listed the house that's going on, and let's say we are contracted. Fast forward, we just signed the offer, and so now we are under contract. So that's when you would create a brand new transaction to handle that. So let's say create new transaction, and then I'll say Brian selling his home. Is of course the seller, and then resale. So you choose this template as that's the relevant template for it. And then you click save. And what's the property address? You do that, and then it's gonna do a city. So you start filling up this form. I actually paused the video and completed this. We can go over this real quick. Number of days for buyer financing approval, and these fields are obviously relevant to the transaction at hand. So we got things like executed date, closing date, option fee, option period, whether the seller has a mortgage, objection period, whether it's lease, so on and so forth. This should cover 95% of the scenario of information you need to plug in. And it probably takes you a minute to do this, and it's a one-time activity. The few things that you wouldn't have at the start of this transaction is probably the MLS number if you haven't, or you may actually have that, but it's optional. It may not necessarily be an MLS. You probably won't have the GF number that the title company provides, and you definitely will not have the title commitment date. And so once you have all of these information filled in, you go ahead and click Save, and that basically updates the transaction. And then just like before, it kind of puts all of your information back in here, just so you can review it, make sure you got it all right. If you didn't, you can always click edit and go back and update it, and then you can come back here. Once all of this is completed, you can go ahead and click generate transaction task, and it'll take a few seconds to do that. Oh, that was pretty quick actually. And that's completed. And then so now if you click on the tasks page, it creates a whole new set of tasks. Now there's only 9 current tasks, but then there are 31 upcoming tasks to finish up this transaction. Of course, nothing is completed or archived at this point. So the first one is a good one here. You're contracted, you want to introduce everybody, you want to introduce the other agent to the title. So you do that. The first thing you may want to do is come in here and add the other agent contact information. So let me just do that real quick. I'll add the other agent. I only filled in a few info, but I would encourage you to fill in as much information as you want so you have a contact information ready to go. So go ahead and hit save. So we have that. And here's one thing. So this is a new transaction, and obviously Brian, our seller, is not in here, and we want him in here. And so one way is to go ahead and create a new contact and type it all in again, but that's no fun. But then we do have an option to copy contacts. So I click on copy contacts, and guess what? Brian shows up. It shows the contacts from the previous few transactions that are relevant. And so obviously Brian is the contact we want to copy. So checkbox, hit copy, and it comes over. The same thing goes for files. When you go to files, if you have files coming from a previous transaction, instead of trying to upload them again, all you do is copy files, check it, and hit copy, and your files come here. So one of the first things you would do in a new transaction, which is in some ways a continuation of the previous transaction, is you can copy over contacts and files. Q&A notes, there's actually none. There's no Q&A per se. Hopefully you asked all the questions you wanted to during the listing process, and so there shouldn't be any more. But of course, you can always create a new question for your client if you want them to answer something. Um, anyway, so let's go back here to the tasks. All this is good. You got all this going, and then just like before, we would continue to work this. For example, to be able to introduce other agent, you would actually, let me also add in this scenario the title company as a contact. So let me quickly do that. So added the escrow officer, and then, so this could be escrow officer again, or it could be the assistant escrow officer sometimes. And then this could be, name of the title. So enter as much or all the information you have. That's always beneficial. Hit save. Um, And so we have all these contacts in here. Now, let me go back to the task and work this. Send contractor title and introduce other agent. So you can, again, you have templates for everything. So click on the email, and that basically gets you a template to basically, addressing to Mary to say, hey, um, this is what's going on. Now, I did notice the buyer contact didn't come through fine because we had to do one thing. So let me go back here, and then yeah, that email didn't come through because I misdid this. This is supposed to be the buyer agent. We generally don't. One thing I refrain from putting, even if I have the buyer information, is putting it in the contacts, because that's something you really don't want to do. Um, because this information is also visible to your client. I really don't want the client calling the other client. I mean, I don't want the client calling the other agent as well, but generally they don't do that. Anyway, so made it buyer agent. Let's go back to the tasks, and then let's click on this icon. Hopefully now it works. Yes. So now it automatically populated. This is addressing the title, company person, the escrow officer, and then letting her know that there's a executed residential resale contract, uh, uh, that has just been signed, and this is the name of the buyer contact right here. Um, and then you can fill in the option fee details, and then the earnest money details. Um, and then what we haven't done is, we haven't, in this example, uploaded the actual um, contract itself. So typically you would go in here to files and upload that actual contract as one of your tasks. So if you have that, that'll show up here, and you can check box and hit send. And that will basically kick off the email with the introduction with all the relevant documents and information to the title company. And so that's kind of the way you start working through your transaction. Um, the key things to note here is, you want to completely fill in this contacts tab with all the relevant contacts. You want to upload all the relevant files, and then once you start doing these, then the tasks execution becomes easy. And then it's point and click at this point, because once you have all the information pertaining to the transaction in the system, then it's a matter of just pointing that information in the right direction. So people who need to get the information get it. So that's basically um, how you start working through the actual contract to close transaction itself. Again, like before, there's a calendar view. You can look at all of the different tasks and what date they need to get done, and so on. And back to list view. Now, as you're going through this transaction, one thing is bound to happen. Um, let's say there has been a change in the closing date. The closing date was scheduled for Monday, and for whatever reason, we can no longer uh, have this as Monday. And so you go in here, you can go and edit the closing date, let's say by another day, 31st. And maybe, property is currently leased, or, any one of these other information can also change. Um, maybe property is situated in an actual utility district. So let's say yes for that, just to make some changes. And maybe seller agreed to some repairs. So let's say yes to that as well, and hit save. So when you hit save now, things have changed. The tasks here are no longer valid because some of the dates have changed. Now, also, it's true that you already started working on these tasks. So now what happens? Now you have this whole thing is a bit of a confusion and a mess. But not to worry, the system has a way to handle it. So system actually detects tasks are outdated, details are updated. So it's saying go ahead and sync the transaction task. And clicking this button, don't worry, won't do anything. And there's a note here, you'll have an opportunity to review and confirm each task update. So the dashboard is suppressed until you complete this. So the next activity to do is to click on sync transaction task. So go ahead and do that. The system is computing all of the transaction tasks that it had previously computed. And it computes a new set of transaction tasks and has identified these are all the differences that I have. For example, you know, we have a new task. This task did not exist before since we said the home belongs to a statutory tax district. And it kind of indicate this is a new addition, add, you know, and then previously we said the seller is not going to do any repairs, but now we have the seller doing repairs. And so it added that line item. And then added two line items for that. One is to complete the repairs. Another one is to make sure we produce the required documentation for these. And all these dates are pre-computed based on the closing date that has since changed or is currently present. But of course, feel free to modify them as needed. And since our closing date itself changed, a number of these things have changed. So all of these stats will need to be synced up. So it gives you what the new due date is, what the new status is, what the original due date is, and what the original status was. It highlights the ones that have changed. So you can see that in this line item, only the date has changed, but the status has not changed. It was not started, it will be not started. Here, obviously, these are new tasks. They didn't have an original status. They will be not started. They'll be not started. Sorry. So let's say we want to sync up all the tasks. We can check the box for all of them and click on sync. Now that we reviewed it, seems like everything is good to go. But we could choose, I don't want to change a certain task. I want this to have the old due date for whatever reason. If you wanted to, you don't have to sync it up. You can leave that task alone. Um, and so it's entirely up to you how you want to handle this. But the system will let you know that it'll handle based on whatever option you choose. It'll work its way to allow you to do what you want to finally do. So you're not forced into doing something that you're not ready to do. So anyway, let's do this. Let's say you want to keep the final walkthrough on the 28th. That's what the day you already scheduled this or something. You already have a plan, and so you don't want to change that to the 29th right now. So you leave that, you uncheck that. You're saying I'm just going to go on the 28th. I've already made plans. So okay, so we'll leave that alone. Sync tasks, syncs all the tasks, and obviously one final task that is not synced is the final walkthrough, right? And which is fine. So we decided not to sync this task. So we're gonna ignore it. It just lets you know that that's the one task you're not synced. It says all the rest of the tasks are synced. You go back to the info page, and then it says, well, not all tasks are synced up. You can do two things. You want to sync remaining tasks. Let me click that. Just basically take you back there. So, but that's not what you want to do. Or you can say, no, forget it. That one task, I'm going to leave it as it is. That I'm going to leave the date, the original date. So click on forget, and what it's going to do is basically going to forget that it needs to sync the task. And there we go. And it's back in here again. And the tasks are all updated with the new dates. The ones we said ignore, it ignored. And we continue on our merry way with some of the information, such as the closing date, which is super critical and affects almost all the tasks changing. So that is one important syncing feature that's built into the system. so you don't have to worry about uh, data changing and how that affects your task. All of that is managed for you, and you can take action based on what's happened and what's going to happen. I want to talk quickly about this transaction email. So you can go and actually send this, include this email in any email correspondence you have about this transaction. And if you do that, it'll show up in this list here. Um, we don't have any right now happening for this transaction, but it'll show up here. Now, anytime you send an email, if you compose an email, it'll automatically include that um, transaction email in that email as well. Um, so just got to do a test email and then send it. I'm sending it, let's say, to the seller, and then I'm going to hit send. So it goes to the seller's inbox. Now let's quickly look at the seller's email box and see what happens over there. So what you're looking here is actually the seller's inbox is actual email. So this email that we just sent shows up in his inbox. Now, if you observe closely what's happening, this came from Phil Dunphy, who's the agent, sent it to Brian Williams, who's the seller. It's CC'd Property Transactor, which is, the application itself has its own email. Then it added a reply to here back like this, back to Property Transactor. So let's say Brian decides to reply. When he hits reply to this email automatically includes the Property Transactor email back again. And then he can type whatever he wants to type. I can't spell. And then he can obviously send. Back in here again, if you go to the email list, you will see that that email that was sent shows up here. We can view it. So Brian responded to it. All he did was hit reply. However, that also, so even though it went off into his inbox, into his Gmail account or whatever account he has, and he's responding back to it, uh, those replies also come back in here. Unless he specifically removes this transaction email, which he has no reason to do. But if he does that, obviously it won't show up here. But otherwise, so all emails going back and forth, and you'll have 100 of those or 200 sometimes for a transaction. All of those get captured back into the system. So tomorrow, if you want to go back and look at all of the email correspondence that have taken place, because only you and your client are on the system. The title company, the lender, all these other third parties, we are communicating to them via email. And when they reply back to us, we want that email to also show up here. And when they reply back to us, they may reply back with attachments. And so again, that will show up here. And then we can directly save. I don't have an email with an attachment to show you, but if they send an email with an attachment, it'll show up here. We can view the email, and then there will be, if there's an attachment, there'll be an option to click a button to just save the attachment directly into the files. So it's very, very powerful in terms of managing all of your transactions which happen within the system or even outside the system, and to capture them all back into the system effectively. So you have one place to go to for all your files, documentation, emails, notes, tasks, contacts, and everything else you need. Now, given all of this, there's going to be a time where you need support, you're stuck with something, you don't know how to proceed, something isn't working, you got an error. There's a support icon or a menu option you can click on. The support option basically will help you create a support ticket, and you can say, just optionally, you can choose if it's a support item with a specific transaction, you can choose that. You could be problem encountered, uh, then be as descriptive as you can, not this 2 words I put in here, and hit save. And that should basically, that'll email support. Uh, then support will get back to you as soon as they can. And then it'll go through the normal support process of open or close. And finally, when you're done, you could obviously mark it as completed. And so there's also that option where you could basically create a support ticket if for whatever reason you're stuck with it. That completes most of the features that are worthwhile mentioning. There's a lot more nuances that you'll discover as you use the system. So if you have any questions, if you're already a logged in user, you can always use a support contact. But let's say you're not registered yet. Let me log myself out, and then you can use this contact form over here, and then you can then send a question through the online contact information as well. That'll be another way you can contact us. So I hope you guys found this useful. And also, last but not the least, there's also this bonus calculator section, which kind of gives you some of the standard calculators you have, the debt to income ratio calculator, mortgage down payment, investment return calculator. And then this is, if you just want to calculate the contract dates, for Texas, there's another calculator. And last is the refinance recovery period calculator. And we'll be adding more of these calculators. If you have any suggestions, let us know as well. So, well, that concludes this presentation, if you will. Hope you all enjoyed it. Um, and again, feel free to let us know if you have any questions. And thank you so much.